She spent 3 hours folding napkins into swans for her cousin's engagement party, and they spent 3 seconds destroying her in front of 200 people. No man wants a woman built like that. Laughter. Crystal glasses raised. Nobody flinched. Naomi Brooks stood in the center of that ballroom wearing the only formal dress that fit her, holding a tray she hadn't been asked to carry, smiling a smile that had taken 34 years to perfect, the kind that hides everything. Then the doors opened, and the most dangerous man in New York City walked straight toward her. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Brooks family had a way of making Naomi feel like furniture. Not the expensive kind. Not the mahogany dining table that her Aunt Celestine had shipped from a dealer on the Upper East Side, the one nobody was allowed to actually eat at. More like the folding table you drag out of the garage when there aren't enough chairs. Useful, temporary, easy to put away. She had known this about her family for a long time. She just never stopped showing up. That was her flaw, maybe. Her most honest one. She showed up for people who had made an art form out of not showing up for her, and she did it with a kind of stubborn, bone-deep consistency that other people might have called loyalty. Naomi called it something different, depending on the day. Some mornings it felt like love. Most nights it felt closer to habit. And on nights like tonight, standing in the service corridor of the Grand Meridian Hotel, with sweat gathering at the back of her neck and a box of hand-calligraphed place cards balanced against her hip, it felt like a sickness she couldn't name. The Grand Meridian occupied an entire city block on Fifth Avenue. It was the kind of place that had a dress code for the lobby and a different dress code for the elevator, and where the carpet in the main ballroom had been replaced 3 times since the building opened because certain families simply could not accept a shade of ivory that had aged even slightly toward cream. The Ellison Brooks engagement gala had been booked here for 4 months. Naomi knew this because she had made the reservation herself, using Aunt Celestine's credit card and her own phone, standing in the break room of the nonprofit office where she worked because her aunt had called at 11:40 in the morning demanding it be handled before lunch. She had handled it. She handled most things. The caterer's timeline, the florist's delivery window, the seating chart that had been restructured 6 times because various relatives refused to be positioned near various other relatives for reasons that were never fully explained but always deeply felt. Naomi had absorbed every revision without complaint, updating the spreadsheet on her laptop during her actual lunch break, eating a sandwich over her keyboard because there wasn't time to do both. She was not the guest of honor tonight. She was not even a guest, not really. She was the person standing in a corridor at 7:14 in the evening, 46 minutes before the gala was scheduled to begin, wondering if the caterer had enough vegetarian options because her cousin Deja, the actual guest of honor, the bride-to-be, the woman whose engagement they were all assembled to celebrate, had mentioned once in passing 3 weeks ago that her future mother-in-law didn't eat meat. Naomi had written it down. Of course she had written it down. She found the head caterer, confirmed the vegetarian entrees, rearranged 2 table centerpieces that had been placed too close to the air conditioning vents, and then went to the restroom to blot her face and look at herself in a mirror that was lit. The way mirrors in expensive hotels are always lit. Aggressively, mercilessly, leaving nowhere to hide. She was a big woman. She had always been a big woman, since before she had words for what that meant, since the time when her grandmother used to squeeze her cheeks and call her solid, which was a word that sounded like a compliment until you got old enough to understand what it was covering. She stood 5'6" and took up space in a way that her family had never been comfortable with, never learned to see past, never once thought to simply accept. Her skin was deep brown, the color of good soil, and her hair was twisted up in a style she had spent an hour on that morning, and her dress was a deep burgundy that she had found after trying on 11 others in a dressing room where she had stood under different lighting and felt the same way she always felt, like she was failing some test she hadn't agreed to take. She looked at herself in the mirror now and did not say anything cruel. That was new. That was something she had been working on for about 2 years. With the help of a therapist she saw every other Thursday in a building on West 86th Street. She did not call herself names. She just breathed, adjusted the back of an earring, and walked out. The ballroom doors opened at 7:30. By 8 o'clock, the room held approximately 200 people, and Naomi knew the name of nearly every one of them and had personally ensured that their dietary restrictions were accommodated and their place cards were correctly positioned, and not a single one of them had thought to ask how she was doing. She stood near the back of the room beside a floor arrangement of white hydrangeas that she had specified herself, holding a glass of sparkling water she hadn't taken a sip from. Her heels were beginning to hurt. She had bought them 2 months ago specifically for this event, and had worn them around her apartment for 3 evenings trying to break them in, which had not worked. She shifted her weight to her left foot. Deja found her 20 minutes in. Deja Ellison Brooks was 27 years old and had the kind of effortless prettiness that got described in family conversation as a gift, as though God had sat down one afternoon and decided to be particularly generous with one set of cheekbones. She was also, when the mood suited her, funny and warm and capable of real affection. Naomi genuinely loved her. That was not the complication. The complication was that Deja had grown up inside a family that operated on a particular hierarchy, and somewhere in that hierarchy, Naomi existed below the line, and Deja had never in 27 years done anything to change that. Not because she was cruel, she wasn't, not at her core, but because the water you grow up swimming in doesn't feel like water. It just feels like the world. Naomi. Deja appeared at her elbow, champagne in hand, radiating the specific energy of a woman who had been praised for the last 2 hours and found it thoroughly agreeable. Did you fix the centerpiece situation? Because my mom said one of the tables in the back looked off. I fixed it before the doors opened. Okay, good. Deja glanced around the room. You look... that color is interesting. Naomi held her expression still. Thank you. I'm just saying, for next time, maybe something a little more... I don't know. Never mind. Deja drifted back toward a group of her friends, trailing a scent that probably cost more per ounce than Naomi's monthly grocery budget. Naomi took a sip of her water. Celestine Brooks found her at 8:45. Celestine was 61, tall, angular, with a face that had been maintained through significant financial investment into an expression of permanent mild dissatisfaction. She had married into money and then accumulated more of it through a combination of strategic real estate decisions and what the family called business sense, and what a less generous observer might have called ruthlessness, applied selectively to people who couldn't fight back. She wore a champagne-colored gown tonight that Naomi recognized as the one she had been shown a photo of and asked to give an opinion on 3 weeks ago, which she had done honestly, saying she thought it was beautiful. Celestine had nodded as though Naomi's approval was simultaneously sought and irrelevant. She came to stand beside Naomi now, and she didn't say hello. She said, "You've been hovering by the hydrangeas all evening. People are starting to notice." I'm fine where I am. I'm not saying it for you. I'm saying it because it looks strange. She paused, scanning the room. Did you eat anything? You should eat something. There's no reason to stand here looking gloomy when there's food. Naomi breathed in through her nose. I'm not gloomy. You're not exactly the picture of joy either. Celestine's voice dropped into a register that wasn't quite a whisper. You know, if you put a little more effort into... there are people here tonight, connected people. You're 34, Naomi. It wouldn't hurt you to circulate. I circulate fine. I'm not talking about making friends. I'm talking about... She made a gesture that managed to mean everything and nothing. You understand what I'm saying. Naomi understood exactly what she was saying. Her aunt had been saying the same thing in different configurations for 15 years. That she was taking up too much space in the wrong ways. That she would be more palatable if she were smaller, lighter, smoother, quieter, and above all paired with someone who could justify her presence in a room like this. That her solitude was a personal failing, and not simply the consequence of having spent most of her adult life surrounded by people who made her feel like she needed to earn the right to exist. She didn't say any of this. She said, I should check on the dessert timeline, and she moved away. She was crossing the edge of the dance floor when she heard it. Not at her, not exactly. She was not even in the cluster of people where the conversation was happening. She caught it the way you catch a smell when a door opens somewhere, Celestine's voice, louder than it should have been, and the word sighs, and then laughter. The sharp, crystalline kind of laughter that requires an audience. She stopped walking. She could have kept going. She had done it before. She had turned away from worse, filed it in the cabinet inside her chest where she kept all the things she had survived and gone on with her evening. But something tonight, maybe the heels, maybe the 11 dresses, maybe the 3 hours of swan-folded napkins, something made her stay still and listen. I'm not saying she isn't a good person, Celestine was saying, in the performative half-apology voice of someone who absolutely was saying exactly that. I'm saying that certain realities are certain realities. You can't expect a man with options to look twice at Mama, Deja's voice, flat with what Naomi could only identify as bored embarrassment. I'm speaking the truth, Deja. No successful man is going to choose someone who looks like that. It doesn't matter how kind she is. Kindness doesn't. And here, Celestine lowered her voice in a way that was perfectly calibrated to still carry. Kindness doesn't fix what's in the mirror. More laughter. Not everyone, but enough. Naomi did not cry. She had made a private arrangement with herself about that. Not here, not in front of them, and she kept it. What she did instead was stand very still and let the words land where they landed, and she felt the familiar collapse begin somewhere in her sternum, the one that started as heat and moved outward, and she thought, I ironed the table linens for this evening. I stayed up until 1 in the morning ironing table linens for this evening. She was turning toward the service exit, moving quietly, intending to find a back hallway where she could breathe for 5 minutes before she had to come back, when the ballroom fell quiet. Not gradually. All at once, the way a room goes quiet when something happens that nobody was prepared for. Naomi stopped because everyone around her stopped, and she turned to look toward the main entrance the way everyone turned, following the sudden vacuum of sound. The doors were open. Not the way doors open when a late guest arrives. There's a particular energy to late arrival, apologetic and shuffling. These doors were open the way doors open when something has already been decided. A deliberate stillness around the movement. 3 men entering first and then stopping, and then another man coming through the center of the space they'd created. He wasn't the tallest man in the room. He wasn't the loudest. He was wearing a black suit that had no business being in a hotel ballroom and somehow owned every corner of it anyway. And he moved through the entrance like a person for whom the concept of a crowd that might not part was simply not within the range of possibility. Korean, she registered, mid-30s, jaw like something cut rather than grown. But more than any of that, and this was the part that she would struggle to explain later, to herself, to her therapist, to anyone, there was the way he looked. Not at the room, not at the wealthy people and their champagne glasses and their judgment and their perfectly placed place cards. He was looking at her. Naomi's first thought was that she had something on her dress. Her second thought was that she was misreading the direction of his gaze, that he was looking at something behind her, or beside her, or anywhere other than at her specifically. Her third thought arrived when he had crossed half the ballroom floor without stopping or slowing and without looking anywhere else. And her third thought was simply, no. Because things like this did not happen to women like her. She understood this as a factual matter. She had 34 years of data. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint shadow along his jaw and the particular quality of his eyes, dark and still, and focused on her with an attention so complete it was almost uncomfortable, like standing in direct sunlight when you've spent years in shade. 200 people were not moving. He said, in a voice quiet enough that only she could hear it, I've been looking for you for 4 years. Naomi looked at him. The sparkling water was still in her hand. She could feel the glass. You have the wrong person, she said. He shook his head just slightly. I don't. Behind her, somewhere in the suspended silence of the room, she heard Celestine Brooks breathe in sharply. And for the first time all evening, Naomi forgot about her heels. What neither she nor the 200 witnesses could know yet was that the man standing in front of her had spent 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days looking for a woman who had never once considered that what she did on a rainy highway outside of the city on a Tuesday night in October was anything other than the obvious thing, the only thing, a decent person could do. What the room also could not know, because Kael So had never been a man who explained himself in advance, was that he had information about the evening she had just survived. The laughter, the dress, the words about the mirror, that she had not told him. He had been there an hour before the doors opened. He had made sure to be. Naomi would not learn this until later. Right now, she only knew that the most dangerous room she had ever stood in had just gotten considerably quieter, and that the man in front of her was not moving, and that every story her family had ever told her about who she was and what she deserved was rattling inside her chest like a coin in an empty jar. She thought about walking away. She thought about it seriously, the way you think about stepping back from a ledge. Not because you want to fall, but because the height is real and you can feel it. She didn't walk away. She stood there, holding her glass of water, and looked back at the man who had walked through 200 people to find her, and she waited to find out what happened next. She had stopped believing in coincidences around the time she turned 30, but she had never fully worked out what she believed in instead. She was about to find out. Outside, somewhere beyond the sealed windows of the Grand Meridian, the city continued doing what it always did. Grinding, loud, indifferent. 40 floors down, a cab driver was leaning on his horn. Somewhere on a crosstown bus, a woman was falling asleep against the window. The ordinary, relentless machinery of New York kept moving. In the ballroom, nothing moved. And in the morning, by tomorrow morning, the story of what happened next would be on the phone screens of people who hadn't been in the room. But the version they would read would not be the truth. And the lies were already being written by someone standing 15 feet away, watching with a champagne glass and a particular kind of smile that Naomi, if she had turned around right then, would have recognized immediately. She didn't turn around. That was the mistake. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Naomi counted them without meaning to, the way you count seconds between lightning and thunder. Not because the number matters, but because your brain needs something to hold on to when everything around you has stopped making sense. Then the room exhaled. Not all at once. It came back in pieces. Someone's champagne glass meeting a tray, the shift of expensive fabric, a woman somewhere near the east windows whispering to the man beside her with the particular urgency of someone who has just witnessed something they know they will be describing for months. The orchestra, which had been midway through a piece nobody was actually listening to, let the notes dissolve into nothing. The lead violinist simply lowered his bow and watched, because he was human, and this was more interesting than Vivaldi. Caelcio did not look at any of them. He was still looking at Naomi with that same quality of attention, the kind that didn't waver, didn't scan, didn't hedge. It was the most unsettling thing about him, she was realizing. Not the bodyguards who stood at measured distances with the stillness of men trained to become architecture. Not the suit, not the jaw, not the fact that he had crossed a room full of New York's wealthiest people as though they were traffic cones. It was the looking. Like he had already decided something and was simply waiting for her to catch up. "You said you've been looking for me," Naomi said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "For 4 years." "Yes." "You don't know me." "I know what you did." He said it simply, no performance in it. The way you'd say, "I know what time it is," or "I know where the door is." A fact, not a compliment. October 14th, 4 years ago. Route 9, about 2 miles past the Pelham interchange. It was raining hard enough that the highway patrol had started pulling people over for visibility. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the glass. She remembered the rain. She hadn't thought about that night in, she couldn't calculate how long. It had not felt like a significant night. It had felt like a Tuesday, which it was, and it had felt cold and wet and inconvenient, which it also was. "There was a woman," he continued. He wasn't speaking loudly, but in the silence of the room, the words carried the way sounds carry across water. Stranded, her car had gone sideways off the shoulder. She didn't have a working phone. She'd been there for over 40 minutes. Naomi said nothing. "Every car passed her," he said. "For 40 minutes, in that rain, not a single driver stopped. Until you." She remembered the hazard lights. A pair of them blinking orange through the sheets of rain, barely visible. The kind of thing you could talk yourself out of stopping for very easily. It's dangerous. Someone else will stop. You don't know who that person is. You have places to be. She remembered sitting in her car with the engine running for about 30 seconds doing exactly that kind of math before she put it in park and got out anyway. She had gotten soaked to the skin in under a minute. She remembered that too. She was scared, Naomi said. Not to him, not really. More to herself or to the memory. She couldn't have been more than 20, 21. 22. Something crossed his face, fast, barely there, like a cloud shadow moving over pavement. Her name is Una. The past tense she'd used registered with her at the same moment he corrected it. Was. She had almost said was scared. And Una was apparently still very much alive, because he had said her name like you say the name of someone you would do anything for. "Is she okay?" Naomi asked. The question came out before she'd processed that it was probably not the most relevant question given the situation she was currently standing in. Something in his face changed. Very slightly. The set of his jaw didn't soften exactly, but something behind his eyes did briefly, in the way a controlled thing sometimes shows you its real nature for just a moment. "She is," he said. She asks me, every time I see her, if I found you yet. The room was not recovering. If anything, the silence was deepening, people pulling each other closer to murmur, or simply standing very still doing the calculation. Who is this man? How much does he have, and what does he want with Naomi Brooks, of all people? Celestine Brooks's plain-spoken, overweight niece who had spent the last 3 hours arranging centerpieces. Naomi was aware of all of it. She had a lifetime of practice being aware of rooms. You should find somewhere to sit down, she said, and explain this to me like a normal person. He almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the territory adjacent to one, the kind of expression that lives 1 degree away from the real thing and is somehow more telling for it. Somewhere quiet, he said. There's a room off the east corridor. The hotel uses it for private events. She heard herself speaking and had the strange sensation of watching herself from a slight distance, the way you sometimes experience your own actions when adrenaline has taken over the controls. I can have it unlocked in 2 minutes. She set her water glass down on a nearby table and walked toward the corridor door without looking back at the room. She felt every single eye on her back for every single one of those steps. She felt Celestine's eyes most of all. The side room was small by Grand Meridian standards, a sitting room with 2 velvet sofas and a bar cart nobody had stocked for tonight. Naomi switched on the lamp rather than the overhead light, because the overhead light was the kind of aggressive fluorescent brightness that belonged in a hospital and not in a conversation she hadn't prepared for. She was still in her heels. She did not sit down. Kael came in after her, and one of the bodyguards moved to close the door. Just one. The other 2 remained outside. This registered with her as a kind of information, though she wasn't sure yet what kind. You went through a lot of trouble, she said. Finding you was the trouble. This part isn't. He stayed near the door, didn't move toward the sofa. They were both standing, which felt right. There was a specific tension in the room that sitting down would have changed in the wrong direction. I had investigators on it for 18 months. Yuna only remembered certain details. The car, an older model dark blue Honda, a woman, black, natural hair, alone. She said you stayed with her for almost 2 hours. The tow truck took a long time. You sat in the rain. I sat in my car mostly. You got out twice to check on her. In the rain. She remembered the rain on your jacket. He paused. She said you didn't ask her name, didn't ask for anything. You just stayed. Naomi looked at the bar cart, crystal decanters catching the lamplight. She said, I don't understand why that required 4 years and investigators. Because she didn't have a license plate. She was too shaken to get it, and too grateful afterward to have thought to ask. And the highway camera footage from that stretch of road that night was corrupted in the storm. Only partial recovery. He said this without frustration, just as information, the way you described the weather. I didn't stop looking. She turned to look at him properly then. She had been half avoiding it, she realized, looking at him in segments, the suit, the jaw, the stillness, rather than the whole thing. Now she looked directly at him, and he looked directly back. Why? She asked. It was the only honest question. Why does it matter that much? Your sister was fine. She got home. Why spend 4 years? Because when I found her that night, he said, and something in his voice went quieter, not softer, but like a room getting quieter rather than a sound getting softer. She was sitting in the passenger seat of your car with a blanket around her shoulders, and she was laughing. Not crying, laughing, because you had been telling her stories about a bad date you went on 3 weeks before. He paused. She was laughing. My sister, alone on a highway in a storm for 40 minutes, and some stranger talked her out of terror with a story about a man who showed up to dinner having Googled the wrong restaurant for 45 minutes. Despite everything, despite the room and the gala and the 100 ways this evening had already broken her open, Naomi almost laughed. She remembered that too. The story about Marcus, the wrong restaurant. She had told it because she couldn't think of what else to say to a scared young woman in the dark. And it was the most recent example of life being ridiculous that she had available. She didn't need to be carried home, Kael said. She needed to be treated like a person. That's what you did. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Seo, she said. Kael. Kael. The name felt strange in her mouth. Not bad strange, just new. I appreciate what you're saying, genuinely, but I need you to understand something about what you just walked into out there. I know what I walked into. Those are my family members, she said, and what you just did, walking across that room, they're going to make something out of it. They're already making something out of it right now in the 3 minutes we've been in here. And whatever they make out of it is going to be about me, not about your sister. He held her gaze. I know. Then you understand that you may have just made my next 6 months significantly more difficult. Or, he said, and there was something in the word, not arrogance, but a kind of certainty that lived so deep it had stopped needing to be loud. Significantly different. She didn't answer that. She didn't have one yet. She became aware, in the silence that followed, that her feet had stopped hurting. She couldn't account for it. The heels hadn't changed. She filed it under things to think about later and said, I need to go back out there. I know. I don't know what this is. It doesn't need to be anything yet, he said. I just needed you to know that someone looked for you for a long time. He said it without decoration, like it was the simplest fact in the world, and he just wanted to make sure it landed. Whatever else happens, you should know that. Naomi picked up her clutch from where she'd set it on the bar cart. She moved toward the door. She stopped when her hand was on the handle. The date story, she said, not turning around. The wrong restaurant. Yes. His name was Marcus. He's married now, has twins. Is that a good ending or a bad one? She thought about it honestly. Neutral, she said, which I've come to appreciate. She opened the door and walked back toward the ballroom. The bodyguard outside the door did not look at her. He looked at a fixed point somewhere past her left shoulder, which she understood was not personal. She walked back into the gala with her spine straight and her face arranged into something that wasn't a smile and wasn't not a smile. And she made it all the way to the hydrangea arrangement before her cousin Marcus, not the wrong restaurant Marcus, a different Marcus, her cousin, 29 years old and sharply dressed, and looking at her with the particular expression of someone who has been waiting, stepped directly into her path. His name was Marcus Ellison, Deja's older brother. He had the family cheekbones and a business degree. He talked about the way some people talk about a sports injury, frequently and with the expectation of sympathy. He had never liked Naomi, not in any year she could remember, and unlike the rest of the family, he had never pretended to. You want to explain what that was, he said. Not a question. The way you say things when you already believe you know the answer and are simply giving the other person a chance to confess. Not especially, she said. Naomi. He moved slightly, blocking the direction she was going. Do you know who that man is? He told me his name. His name. Marcus's jaw tightened. You think this is about a name? Do you know what family that is? What business? I know what he told me. He lowered his voice, which with Marcus meant he was actually concerned rather than performing concern. His family runs operations across half the East Coast that are not the kind of operations you put in an annual report. You understand what I'm saying? The people around him tonight, those aren't assistants. I know they're not assistants. Then what are you doing? He looked at her with something that might have been genuine and wasn't quite. You're not Naomi, come on. Think. A man like that doesn't walk into a room and cross it for... He has reasons for everything he does. Everything. You don't stumble into someone's line of sight by accident. What did you promise him? What does he want from you? Something slow and cold moved through her chest. There it was. She had known it was coming, had felt it building in the room the moment the ballroom doors opened. But hearing it said out loud by her own blood, in that particular tone that wrapped suspicion in the language of concern, still landed like a flat palm against an already tender place. What I promised him, she repeated. I'm not trying to insult you. Yes, you are, she said. Her voice was very calm. That was the thing about 34 years of practice. She had learned how to be calm when what she wanted to do was something altogether different. You're trying to insult me in the specific way where I'm supposed to feel like I should be grateful you're asking at all. Because the alternative, that a man with power and money walked across a room because he wanted to find me, specifically for a real reason. That version of events doesn't fit the story your family has been telling about me for 15 years. Marcus stared at her. Move, she said. He moved. She went to find another glass of water because her mouth was dry and her hands were not entirely steady and she needed 30 seconds to herself, which she did not get, because Celestine intercepted her at the drinks table with the specific energy of a woman who has been holding a conversation in her head for the last 10 minutes and can no longer wait to have it out loud. Naomi. Her aunt's voice was the kind of control that costs effort. Sit with me. I'm fine standing. It wasn't a request. Celestine's fingers closed around her elbow, not painfully, but with the certainty of someone who has never had to ask twice and does not intend to start. She steered them both toward a small table near the perimeter of the room, away from the density of guests, and sat down across from Naomi with her champagne glass and her expression. You need to be very careful, Celestine said. I've been careful my whole life. This is different. Her aunt leaned forward slightly. In the low light, her face was all angles and intent. That man has a reputation, not the kind that gets written about in business journals. The other kind. He explained why he came. I'm sure he did. Celestine's mouth pressed together. Men like that always have an explanation. They're very good at explanations. That's not the same as truth. His sister, Naomi began. I don't want to hear about his sister. Celestine's voice was sharp now. The pretense of gentle concern dropped. I want you to understand what this looks like. It looks like you orchestrated this, whether you did or you didn't. And I'm not saying it. You are saying, Naomi said. I'm saying that by morning, every person in this room will have a version of what happened tonight on their phone. And the version they'll have, the version that makes sense to them, Naomi, because people believe what makes sense, is not the one where a powerful man walked across a ballroom because he has a debt of gratitude to a woman nobody has ever looked twice at. The words were so precise and so naked and so completely unaware of their own cruelty that for a moment Naomi could not speak. A woman nobody has ever looked twice at. She sat with that, let it settle where it settled, felt it do the thing it was designed to do. Then she stood up from the table. Thank you for the warning, she said. Naomi, the dessert service starts in 15 minutes. I arranged for the petite four to come out on the silver trays, not the white ones. Someone should probably confirm that with the kitchen. She walked away from the table before her aunt could answer, and she did not stop walking until she was through the service door and in the corridor, and the door had swung shut behind her with its heavy, well-maintained Grand Meridian silence. She stood in the corridor. The floor was industrial here, not marble. The lighting was functional. The sound from the ballroom was muffled into a low collective hum, the sound of 200 people building their versions of the evening out of what they'd seen. She was breathing too fast. She focused on that, slowing it down, in through the nose, the way her therapist had shown her when the walls got close. The technique worked the same in hotel corridors as it did in offices, she'd learned, which was useful. She was still standing there 3 minutes later when she heard the footsteps. Not the bodyguards. She could tell by the sound, one set, a single unhurried pace, not the coordinated quiet of men who moved as a unit. She turned. Kyle Seo stood at the end of the corridor. He had a glass of water. He held it out toward her without a word, as though the offering was self-evident. She stared at it. How did you know You didn't have a drink when you left the table, he said, and you'd set down the last one. She took the glass. She drank half of it standing there in the service corridor under the fluorescent lights with her heels and her burgundy dress and the sound of her aunt's voice still sitting in her chest like a stone. They think I set this up, she said. I know. My family. They think I... She stopped, tried again. My cousin Marcus thinks you want something from me, that there's an angle. There isn't. I know there isn't. She looked at him. But it doesn't matter what I know. It matters what gets repeated. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need? The question stopped her, not because it was complicated, because it was so simple that she couldn't immediately locate the answer. People in her life did not typically ask what she needed. They told her what was needed from her, which was different. She had spent so long living in the second version of that question that the first one sat in the air between them, and she looked at it like a word you've read too many times and briefly forgotten how to recognize. I need tonight to be over, she said finally. That's specific. I need tonight to be over, and I need to go home, and I need to not have to think about the look on my aunt's face when she realizes how this story is going to get told online by tomorrow morning. She paused. And I need more water. He took the glass from her hand, turned, and walked to a water station she hadn't noticed at the end of the corridor. A small service setup, a simple pitcher, filled the glass, and came back. She drank it. She said, "You should go back in there." "Probably. It's going to be worse if you're out here." "Worse for whom?" She thought about it. "Me, mostly." "Then I'll go back in." He took the empty glass. He was about to turn back toward the door when he stopped. Something in the stillness of him changed. Not physically, but like a frequency shift, an adjustment in the air around him. "You should know," he said, "that whatever they say tonight, whatever story gets told, I'll be able to find out who said what." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not asking you to do anything." "I know." He met her eyes. "I'm telling you what's true, not what I'm planning. What's true." He paused. "There's a difference." He went back through the door. She stood in the corridor for another minute. Then she picked up her clutch, straightened the back of her earring, and followed. She did not know that Marcus Ellison had stepped outside the ballroom 12 minutes earlier with his phone in his hand. She did not know that he had spent those 12 minutes typing into 3 separate group chats and 2 individual contacts, laying the groundwork of a story with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime managing his family's social narrative. She did not know the specific word he had used for her, or the specific words he had used for Kael, or the way he had framed the evening as a performance staged by a desperate woman for a criminal's benefit. She did not know any of this yet. But somewhere across the city, in an apartment belonging to a journalist who covered New York social circles with a particular appetite for stories about status and spectacle, a phone lit up with a message that contained Naomi's full name, her employer, her neighborhood, and the words, "You're not going to believe what just happened at the Meridian." The message had been sent at 9:47 p.m. By 10 o'clock, it had been forwarded twice. By the time Naomi got home that night and took off the heels that had never truly fit and sat on the edge of her bed in the quiet of her apartment, the story was already loose in the world, moving the way stories move when they've been built to spread, fast and crooked and almost impossible to. The story broke at 6:43 in the morning. Naomi knew the exact time because she had not slept, and she had been lying on her back in the dark, watching the ceiling change color as the city outside her window moved from black to the particular gray-purple that precedes dawn in New York. The color of something that hasn't decided yet what it's going to be. She had her phone face down on the nightstand. She had put it there at midnight as a deliberate act of self-preservation. The same way you move a bottle to the other side of the room when you know you have a problem with reaching for it. At 6:43, she picked it up. 41 notifications. Then, while she was looking at the number 42, she sat up slowly. Her body had that particular stiffness of someone who had been still for hours without actually resting, every joint announcing itself. She was still in the dress. She had sat down on the edge of the bed when she got home and apparently not moved in any meaningful way since, which told her something about the state of her mind that she wasn't ready to examine. She opened the first notification. It was a message from a number she didn't recognize, and it contained a link. She followed the link and found herself looking at an article on a New York social media platform she recognized, the kind of outlet that occupied the specific territory between gossip and journalism, that understood its audience wanted their speculation delivered with the vocabulary of reporting. The headline read, "Who is the woman who snagged New York's most dangerous billionaire?" And below it was a photograph of her. It was from inside the ballroom. Someone had taken it on a phone, not a professional camera, but a good phone, the kind of image quality that comes from expensive hardware. And it showed her standing in front of the hydrangeas in her burgundy dress at the moment Kael had first stopped in front of her. Her face was turned slightly toward him. She looked. She registered with a detached part of her brain, like a woman in the middle of being surprised, which she had been. That part was accurate. The rest of the article was not. She read it the way you read something that you know is going to hurt, quickly, hoping speed will reduce the impact, which it doesn't. The article described her as a woman with minimal professional profile and no notable social presence who had somehow positioned herself in KLCO's line of sight at a private family event. It used the word orchestrated twice. It quoted an unnamed source close to the family. And she knew immediately, with the certainty of someone who has spent decades learning to read the particular grammar of betrayal, exactly whose voice was underneath those words, who said that the encounter had not been the spontaneous reunion it appeared to be, and that questions had been raised about what Naomi Brooks may have offered or promised in exchange for the introduction, what she may have offered She put the phone down on the mattress. She picked it up again. She read the rest. The article had a sidebar that she initially scrolled past and then went back to because something in her peripheral vision had snagged on it, a photograph. Not of her this time, of Kyle. A file image, the kind pulled from a business database, showing him in a different suit at what looked like a different event, standing beside two other men. The caption described him using 3 words that were doing significant work: alleged, ties, and organization. She understood that she had, in some way she hadn't fully mapped yet, walked into a situation that was considerably larger than a ballroom and a glass of sparkling water. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Her mother was a woman named Gloria Brooks, who lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Bronx and worked 3 days a week as a bookkeeper for a dentist's office, and who had spent most of her adult life in a complicated relationship with her sister Celestine. Close enough to be pulled into the orbit, far enough away to occasionally see it clearly. Gloria and Naomi spoke on the phone every Sunday, and sometimes on Wednesdays. Gloria was not, as a rule, an early caller. The text said, "Call me when you're up. I saw something online I need to talk to you about. Don't panic." "Don't panic" from a mother, sent at 6:50 in the morning, was in fact an instruction specifically engineered to produce panic, and Naomi felt the first real spike of it move through her now, a cold electric thing that started in her stomach and branched outward. She called. Her mother picked up on the first ring. "I saw it," Naomi said before Gloria could speak. "The article." Not a question. "Yes." A pause. Then her mother said carefully, "Naomi, I have to ask you something, and I need you not to get upset before I finish asking it. Mom, did you know he was going to be there last night?" The spike of cold moved up into her chest. "No. Because the way it's written, I know the way it's written. I didn't know he was going to be there. I had never met the man before in my life." She stood up from the bed. Standing felt necessary. Something about the direction gravity pulled when she was horizontal was not working for her right now. "The article is wrong." "I believe you." Her mother's voice had the particular quality of someone who believes you and is also worried about what believing you means for what comes next. "Celestine called me this morning." Naomi stopped moving. "She called you?" "At 6:15, before the article even." Another pause that carried weight. "She said she was concerned. She said she thought you had made a very serious error in judgment last night." "What else did she say?" Her mother was quiet for 2 seconds too long. "Mom, what else did she say?" "She said," Gloria's voice dipped, "she said that Marcus has been getting calls this morning from people he knows in Kyle Sio's circles, business contacts. She said those people were asking questions about you, about your employment, your background, whether you had any connection to certain—" She stopped. Celestine used the word investigation. She said there might be people looking at last night's event as some kind of— "That's not true," Naomi said. Her voice was very flat now. "Whatever she told you, it's not true." "I know that." "Then why did you ask me if I knew he was going to be there?" The silence this time was the kind that has a shape to it. "Because I'm scared for you," her mother said simply. "And scared people ask stupid questions. I'm sorry." Naomi sat back down on the bed. The dress had a small wrinkle across the left side where she'd been lying in it, she noticed. A perfectly good dress, creased now. She thought about the 11 dressing rooms. She thought about putting the dress on and deciding it was enough, and going to the event and being used as a punchline, and then somehow, at the end of that same evening, becoming the subject of an article that was currently producing 40, now 48 notifications on her phone. "I'm going to handle this," she said. "How?" She didn't have an answer for that yet. "I'll call you tonight." She hung up and stood in the middle of her bedroom and did an honest inventory of what she had. She had a job, a director-level position at a nonprofit focused on housing advocacy, work she had built over 12 years and was genuinely proud of. She had a lease on this apartment. She had a therapist she saw every other Thursday, and a life that was not glamorous but was hers and was real, built from the inside out on things that she had actually chosen. She had a clean name and a clear conscience and zero connection to anything that should produce the kind of article she had just read. What she did not have was a way to stop a story that was already in motion. She showered. She changed. She made coffee and drank half of it standing at the kitchen counter, and then she called her boss, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had been running the nonprofit for 16 years and had a very refined instinct for when something was about to become complicated, and gave her a concise, factual account of the previous evening before Patricia could read something online and form her own version. Patricia listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Do you need legal counsel?" "I don't know yet." "I have a name. When you know, call me first." That was Patricia. Naomi hung up feeling marginally more stable, which lasted approximately 20 minutes until her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, and she made the mistake of answering. The voice on the other end was smooth in the practiced way of someone whose job requires it to be smooth. A journalist, not from the outlet that had run the morning article, a different one, larger, the kind with an editorial board and a building with its name on it. He said he was working on a follow-up piece and had some questions about her background, her relationship with Kael Seo, and he said this with the particular delicacy of someone dropping something heavy from a height. Whether she had any comment on the suggestion that their meeting last night may have been connected to a federal inquiry into the Seo family's operations in the Northeast Corridor. She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long moment. Federal inquiry. That was new. That was a word that did not belong in her apartment, in her morning, in her life as she had constructed it. She turned the phrase over in her mind the way you turn an unfamiliar object over, looking for the part that explains what it is. Her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number, different from the journalist. It said, "We should talk." Not through intermediaries. KS. She stared at it. She typed back, "How did you get this number?" The response came in under 30 seconds. "I told you. I've been looking for you for 4 years. I'm thorough." She almost put the phone down. Instead, she typed, "There's apparently a federal inquiry." A longer pause this time. Then, "I know. That predates you by a considerable margin. You are not part of it. I can explain." She typed, "Where?" He sent an address on the Lower East Side. A restaurant. She recognized the name. A Korean place she had walked past 100 times without going into. "Lunch," he wrote, 12 o'clock. She typed, "I'll be there at 12:15. I'm not rushing." She did not examine why she added that last sentence. It felt important in a way she couldn't fully articulate. Some small assertion of pace in a morning that had moved entirely too fast in entirely the wrong direction. She arrived at 12:17 because the subway had opinions about the morning, and she walked into the restaurant and found it closed to the public, and Kael sitting at a table in the back with green tea and the particular stillness of someone who had been there long enough to be comfortable with it. There were no bodyguards visible inside. She registered that too. She sat down across from him and did not take off her coat. "Federal inquiry," she said. "It's a RICO investigation into my father's generation of business operations," he said. It came out with no preamble, no softening. "It has been ongoing for 6 years. I am a named associate, not a named target. My legal team has been cooperative with the inquiry for 18 months. I am not going to prison." He paused. "That is the factual summary." "And last night?" "Last night made you adjacent to something you have no actual connection to. I understand that." She looked at him across the table. He looked back the same way he always looked, directly, without the performance of directness, which was different. "Do you understand that there's an article online right now that suggests I engineered our meeting at that party?" "I've seen it." "Do you understand that the source for that article—" She stopped. Reset. "The unnamed source in that article is someone in my family." Something in his face tightened, very slightly. "I know who the source is." She went still. "You know." "I had people monitoring certain communications after last night. Given the environment, it was precautionary." He held her gaze. "The messages went out from your cousin Marcus Ellison's phone. They began at 9:47 p.m., approximately 40 minutes after we spoke in the corridor." The precision of it, 9:47, 40 minutes, Marcus Ellison's phone, landed with a specific weight. Not because it surprised her. It did not entirely surprise her. But there is a distance between suspecting something and being handed the specific timestamp of your family member's betrayal, and crossing that distance in a restaurant booth at 12:17 on a Thursday morning produces a particular kind of cold. "My cousin," she said. "Yes." Deja's brother. "Yes." She looked at the green tea she hadn't touched. The steam had stopped rising. It had been sitting long enough to cool. Why? She said. Not why did he do it. She could map that easily enough. The equation of jealousy and small-mindedness, and the particular resentment of someone who had decided long ago that Naomi's place in the family hierarchy was below his and had built a significant amount of his self-concept on that foundation. She meant something larger. Why does it always cost this much? Why is the bill always this high for the same transaction? Why does existing, just simply existing in a way that contradicts the story people have decided to tell about you, why does that always end up being the most expensive thing? She didn't say any of that. She said, "What did he tell them exactly?" Cale reached into his jacket and set a folded piece of paper on the table. She looked at it. She picked it up. It was a printout of a text message chain. She read it. Her cousin had written, across 3 separate group chats and 2 individual contacts, a version of the previous evening that was detailed and specific and almost entirely constructed. He had described her arrival at the hotel not as a participant in organizing the event, but as someone who had inserted herself into the planning in order to use the family's social connections for access. He had described her conversation with Kyle as a prearranged meeting between a woman seeking a wealthy connection and a man whose operations were, he had written with the confidence of someone who understands the value of implication over accusation, not the kind you discuss in public. He had used her weight twice, not as a cruel joke this time. He was smarter than that, in writing, but as a kind of incredulity, a what are the odds framing that accomplished the same thing while maintaining deniability. He had also, in one of the individual messages, to a contact whose name she didn't recognize but whose number had a 212 area code, included the name of her employer. She set the paper down. "He gave them my employer," she said. "Yes. He was trying to—" She stopped. The full architecture of it was becoming visible to her now, the way a building becomes visible when you step back far enough. This was not just gossip. This was targeted. He had handed a journalist the tools to make this a professional story, not just a social one. Make it about her job, her access, her nonprofit, and suddenly the article wasn't just about a woman at a party. It was about a pattern. A calculated woman using institutional access for personal gain. That was the story he had been trying to build. "He was trying to get me fired," she said. Cale said nothing, which was its own answer. She breathed in, breathed out. She became aware of the restaurant around her, the low light, the sound of someone in the kitchen, the particular smell of a space that is very clean and very quiet. She became aware of her own hands on the table and made a conscious decision not to clench them. "I need you to tell me something honestly," she said. "Yes. Whatever you're planning to do about this, whatever your next move is, I need you to tell me before you make it. Not after. Before." She met his eyes. "Because this is my life, not yours. Mine. And I don't care how thorough you are or how many people you have monitoring communications. You do not make decisions about my life without me in the room." He looked at her for a moment that was slightly longer than a normal pause. "Agreed," he said. "I mean it. I know you mean it. Agreed." She picked up the tea. It was lukewarm now. She drank it anyway because she needed something to do with her hands. "So tell me," she said, "what's the next move?" What he told her took 11 minutes. She listened without interrupting, which was difficult because there were several points at which she wanted to interrupt. But she had asked the question, and she owed him the courtesy of the full answer. He described a charity event, his foundation's annual gala, already scheduled for 3 weeks from now, and what he was considering doing at it. He described it plainly, without drama, the way you describe a logical sequence of actions. His voice stayed level throughout. When he finished, she was quiet for a while. "You do that in front of all those people," she said. "Yes." "Politicians? Journalists?" "Yes." "Live cameras?" "Yes." She looked at her empty teacup. "That makes this real," she said. "Once you do that, it's not a quiet thing anymore. There's no version of my life after that where I'm not the woman in that story." "You're already the woman in a story," he said. "The question is which one?" She felt something move in her chest. Not the cold thing from earlier, something different, harder to name. The particular feeling of standing at the edge of a change you didn't ask for and understanding. With the full weight of your years and your experience and every version of yourself you've had to be just to get to this room, that it doesn't matter whether you asked for it. It's here. I need a few days, she said. Take them. She stood. She put on her coat. She was almost to the door when she stopped. Not because she'd planned to, but because something had been sitting in the back of her throat since she'd walked in, and it needed to come out. She turned around. My cousin gave a journalist my employer's name, she said. This morning, that journalist called me at approximately 10 a.m. I hung up. She paused. By now, he's probably already reached out to my organization directly. Cale's expression did not change, but something behind it did. She was learning to read the difference. I know, he said. How long before it becomes a real problem for my job? He considered the question with an honesty she hadn't expected. 48 hours, possibly less. She nodded, turned back toward the door. Naomi. She stopped. For what it's worth, he said, and his voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Not softer, but closer, like he was letting something stand nearer to the surface than usual. What your cousin did says nothing about you. It says everything about a man who has spent his entire life deciding your ceiling. She stood with her hand on the doorframe. I know, she said. The problem is the ceiling is already falling. She pushed through the door into the cold afternoon, and the city received her with its usual indifference. The noise and the grit and the 10,000 simultaneous lives happening in every direction. And she walked half a block before she stopped on the sidewalk and stood very still for a moment, because something had just occurred to her. The journalist who had called her at 10 a.m. He had known her employer's name. Marcus's message had gone out at 9:47 p.m. the night before. That meant the journalist had been contacted within hours and had worked through the night, which meant this was not a casual inquiry. Someone had pushed it hard. The way you push something when you have an interest in the outcome that goes beyond the story itself. She stood on the sidewalk outside a closed Korean restaurant on the Lower East Side and turned that fact over and understood, with the slow, terrible clarity of a thing that has been true for longer than you knew it, that her cousin Marcus had not just been jealous. He had been useful to someone, and she did not yet know who had been using him. She took out her phone. She called Patricia. It went to voicemail. She left a message saying she needed the lawyer's name that had been offered that morning, and she needed it today. And she was sorry for the short notice, and she hung up and put the phone in her pocket and started walking. The city moved around her. The ceiling, as she'd said, was falling. She could hear it, not literally, but in the way you hear things that are coming before they arrive. The low frequency of consequence traveling toward you through the ground. She had 3 weeks before Kael's event. She had 48 hours, possibly less, before her professional life became the collateral damage in a war she had not declared. And she had absolutely no plan, which was the part that should have frightened her most. Except that something had shifted in the restaurant, in the moment she had put her hands flat on the table and told a man with considerable power that he did not make decisions about her life without her in the room. And what had shifted was this. She was no longer waiting to see what happened to her. She was deciding what happened next. The woman who had spent 34 years being the folding table was putting herself away for, she had 47 hours. She knew this because Patricia had called back at 2:15 that same afternoon and told her, in the careful voice of a woman who has managed crises before and understands that tone is the first tool, that the journalist from the large outlet had indeed contacted the nonprofit's communications office at 11:40 a.m. He had asked for comment on Naomi Brooks's relationship with Kael Seo and whether the organization had any awareness of its directors' associations with individuals under federal investigation. Those were the words, federal investigation, about a person Naomi had met 12 hours ago. What did communications say? Naomi asked. She was sitting on a bench in Madison Square Park because she had needed air and had walked until she found some, which had taken longer than it should have. They said no comment pending internal review, Patricia said, which buys us time, not much. How much? The board meets virtually tomorrow at 4 p.m. I've already been contacted by 2 members. Patricia paused. They're not hostile, but they're nervous, and nervous board members in a nonprofit that depends on public trust and donor relationships do things that calm board members don't. They're going to ask me to step back. A pause. They're going to consider it. I want you there tomorrow to make your own case before they make a decision without you in the room. Naomi thought about what Kael had said in the restaurant. You do not make decisions about my life without me in the room. and felt the strange vertigo of a principle she had just asserted being immediately tested. "I'll be there," she said. "Good." Patricia's voice shifted slightly. Not warmer, but more human, the professional face dropping an inch. "Naomi, for what it's worth, 12 years. I know who you are." "I know you do." "Make sure the board knows it too." She hung up and sat with the cold coming in off the park, and the sounds of the city doing its relentless, ordinary thing all around her, and she made a list in her head. Not on paper. In her head, because writing it down made it real in a way she wasn't ready for yet. She needed a lawyer. She needed a statement. Not for the press, not yet, but for the board meeting tomorrow. Something that laid out the actual sequence of events without sounding defensive, because defensive and innocent look identical from a distance and only one of them was useful. She needed to talk to Kyle again, tonight if possible, because the 48-hour window he had described was already at 46 and shrinking. She needed to eat something because she had not eaten since the half sandwich at her desk 2 days ago, which her body was now reporting to her as a formal complaint. She bought a falafel from a cart on the corner and ate it walking, which was not dignified but was efficient, and she called the lawyer, a woman named Diane Chu, whose name Patricia had texted along with 3 words, sharp, fast, ruthless, and left a message that covered the essentials in under 2 minutes. Diane Chu called back in 4. "Tell me everything," Diane said. Her voice had the texture of someone who drinks black coffee and considers small talk a form of inefficiency. "Don't edit. Don't summarize. Start from the beginning and tell me everything." Naomi told her everything. It took 22 minutes. Diane asked 4 questions, all of them precise, none of them soft. At the end she said, "The article is defamatory on its face. The unnamed source issue complicates immediate action. But if we can establish the identity of the source, which it sounds like you can, we have a case that makes the outlet's legal team very uncomfortable very quickly." "I know who the source is. Can you prove it?" Naomi thought about the piece of paper Kyle had set on the table. The printout. The timestamps. "I have documentation," she said. A pause. "How did you obtain it?" "Someone gave it to me. Someone with the resources to monitor private communications." "Yes." Another pause. Longer. "I'm going to ask you one question, and I need a straight answer." "Go ahead." "Is there anything at all, that connects you to Kyle Seo's business operations, past or present, in any capacity, however small, however indirect?" "No." "You're certain?" "I am completely certain." "Okay." Diane's voice shifted into a register that was, Naomi realized, her version of reassurance, which sounded like most people's version of strategic planning. "Here's what we're going to do." What they were going to do took another 14 minutes to outline, and by the end of it, Naomi was back at her apartment building, standing outside the door with her key in her hand, and the beginning of something that felt cautiously like a plan. She slept 4 hours. She was at Diane Chu's office on Park Avenue at 8 a.m. with everything she had, which was not much and was, Diane told her without particular emotion, enough. The board meeting was at 4. She arrived at the nonprofit's conference room at 3:55, which was deliberate. She had worn a gray blazer and her good earrings, and a face that she had spent 10 minutes in the bathroom mirror negotiating into something that communicated, "I am here, I am calm, and I have not done what they are suggesting." There were 7 board members on the virtual call and 2 in the room. Patricia sat at the head of the table. The 2 in-room members were a man named Gerald, who had been on the board for 9 years, and once told Naomi at a fundraiser that she was the most competent person in the organization, and a woman named Sylvia, who had joined 18 months ago, and whose expression currently communicated that she would very much prefer to be somewhere else. Gerald looked at her when she walked in. He gave her a nod that was small and direct and meant, "I know who you are." She sat down. The meeting opened with Patricia framing the situation in neutral language. An article, questions raised, the organization's commitment to transparency and due diligence. Then she turned it over to the board. The first voice from the virtual call was a man named Rowan, who had the energy of someone who had already decided and was now performing the deliberation. "Naomi, I think I speak for the group when I say we want to hear directly from you. Can you walk us through your relationship with Mr. Seo?" "I met him for the first time the night before last," she said, "at my cousin's engagement gala. I had never spoken to him before. I had no prior connection to him, his family, or his business in any capacity." The article suggests the meeting was arranged. The article is wrong. It cites a source close to your family. I know who the source is, she said. My cousin Marcus Ellison. I have documentation of the messages he sent the night of the event, time-stamped, establishing that he was the origin point for the information given to the press. She opened the folder she had brought. Diane had prepared copies. She slid them to Gerald and Sylvia in the room and held up a third. I'm having this transmitted to the virtual participants now. She nodded to Patricia's assistant, who was standing at the laptop. Silence on the call. Rowan said carefully, "How did you obtain this documentation?" "Through legal means," she said, which was what Diane had told her to say, and it was true, and it was also all she was going to say about it. Sylvia was looking at the papers. Her expression had shifted from "I want to be elsewhere" to something more alert. "He named the organization," she said. She was looking at the printout. "In the original messages, he specifically named your employer." "Yes," Naomi said. That's targeted," Sylvia said. "Yes," Naomi said again. "It is." Gerald set his copy of the papers down. He looked at Naomi over the top of his glasses with the expression of a man who has been in enough rooms to recognize when something is being done to someone versus when someone has done something. "What do you need from us?" he said. She had prepared for hostile questions. She had not entirely prepared for that one, from that direction, in that tone. She felt something move in her chest. Not the cold thing, not the grief thing, something older and steadier. "I need 2 weeks," she said. "The situation is going to resolve publicly within 3 weeks. I need you to hold the line until it does." "Resolve how?" Rowan said from the call. "I can't give you the details. But I can tell you that the record will be corrected in a public forum in a way that makes the current narrative untenable." She paused. "I'm asking you to trust 12 years. The meeting went another 40 minutes. There were questions she answered and questions she deflected with Diane's phrasing, and one moment where Rowan pushed hard enough on the federal investigation angle that she felt her jaw tighten, but she held it, kept her voice even, and said, "I am not the subject of any investigation. I have legal counsel. I am fully cooperative with any inquiry the board wishes to make. There is nothing to find because there is nothing there." When it was over, Patricia walked her to the elevator. "They're going to hold," Patricia said quietly. "Gerald and Sylvia will carry it." "And Rowan," Patricia's mouth pressed together. "Rowan will follow the majority. He always does." She paused at the elevator. 3 weeks. "Less," Naomi said. She went home and changed out of the blazer and called Kyle. He picked up on the second ring. "Board meeting went okay," she said. "For now. You need to tell me exactly what happens at your event and when." 18 days, he said. "The CO Foundation Gala. It's at the Mandarin. 600 attendees, press, political, business. I'm the keynote. And what you're planning to do, I'm going to tell the truth. From the stage. In front of cameras." His voice was level. "All of it. The highway. Una. What actually happened at the gala. And who you are." She was quiet for a moment. "You understand that once you do that, my cousin's story falls apart publicly. That's the point. And the article. The outlet will retract. I have a call with their legal team scheduled for Friday. They're already aware that their source's credibility is compromised." He paused. Diane Chu moves fast. Despite everything, something almost like a laugh moved through her. "You know she called you." "She called my legal team at 9 this morning. They had a productive conversation." He paused again. "She's very good. She's terrifying." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." Naomi sat down at her kitchen table. The apartment was quiet around her, the specific quiet of an evening where you've survived something and haven't yet figured out what the surviving means. "Kyle," she said. "Yes. After the event. After you do this thing." She looked at her hands on the table. "What happens to Marcus?" A silence. The kind with weight. "I've identified 3 business contracts he holds through his consulting firm," Kyle said. 2 with companies where I have relationships. 1 with a city agency where I have influence." His voice was careful here. Not apologetic. Careful. Those contracts would not survive a thorough review of the circumstances under which they were awarded. You're saying they weren't clean. I'm saying they were not awarded based purely on merit. She absorbed that. You're not going to touch him physically. No. He said it without hesitation. That's not what this is. I'm asking because I need to know what I'm adjacent to. You're adjacent to a man using entirely legal leverage to expose another man's dishonesty, he said. Business contracts, professional reputation, public record, nothing else. She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why she believed him. She had known him for less than 48 hours, and he was, by any objective measure, a person whose biography contained significant complications. But there was something about the way he said nothing else. It was the same quality as everything else he said. Not performed, not trying to land a particular way. Just true. Okay, she said. Okay, he said back. She hung up and sat in her kitchen for a long time. The 18 days that followed were the strangest of her life. Not because of dramatic events. It was the opposite, in a way. The article cycled through the news ecosystem and faded, the way articles do when the follow-up doesn't come fast enough to sustain the momentum. Diane's Friday call with the outlet's legal team produced a quiet editorial note added to the bottom of the piece stating that certain claims were under review, which was not a retraction, but was the shape of one beginning to form. The journalist stopped calling. The 48 notifications became 6, became 0. She went to work. She ran her meetings. She sat across from her therapist on a Thursday and described the last 3 weeks in the measured, analytical way she had learned over 2 years of practice. And her therapist said, "It sounds like you advocated for yourself in every room you walked into." And Naomi said, "I tried." And her therapist said, "That's not trying, that's doing." And Naomi sat with that for the rest of the session. She and Kyle talked on the phone 4 times in those 18 days. Not long calls, functional ones mostly, updates on the legal situation, confirmation of what he was planning to say at the event. One call that started as functional and ended up being 45 minutes about other things, about her work and his foundation, and the particular absurdity of New York in February, and the story about Marcus with the wrong restaurant, which she told him in full this time. He laughed. She hadn't heard him laugh before. It was a real one, brief, genuine, slightly surprised at itself. She thought about that laugh more than she intended to. The night of the CO Foundation Gala arrived on a Thursday. She had not been planning to attend. That had been the arrangement. He would do what he was going to do, and she would not be there, because her presence at his event, while the situation was still unresolved, would only produce more noise. That had been the plan as of 6 days ago. 4 days ago, he had called and said, "Come." "That's not what we discussed." "I know. I'm asking you to change it." "Why?" A pause. "Because the story I'm going to tell is about a real person, and I'd like that person to be in the room when I tell it, so that the 600 people watching understand she isn't a concept." He paused again. "And so that she hears it, in case nobody has said it to her clearly before." She had held the phone for a long moment. "I'll think about it," she said. She thought about it for 4 days, and then she went back to the dressing room. Not 11 this time, just 1, and she bought a different dress. Not burgundy. Dark green, deep and deliberate, the color of something that has decided to be seen. She arrived at the Mandarin Oriental at 7:45 p.m. The room was extraordinary. 600 people filling a space that knew how to hold them. The particular electricity of a gathering where influence was the atmosphere, where the people who decided things in this city had come together in the specific performance of generosity that makes power comfortable with itself. Press cameras at the perimeter. A stage with 2 enormous screens flanking it. The kind of event where what happens gets broadcast and remembered. She found a spot near the left side of the room, not center, not hidden, a place where she could stand and breathe and watch without performing anything. She had been there 12 minutes when she felt someone step up beside her. She turned. Eunicio was 26 years old and had the kind of face that expressed everything it felt immediately and without apology. She was also, Naomi registered, looking at her with an expression that was doing several things at once: recognition, relief, something that was working very hard not to become tears, and was almost succeeding. "You don't know me," Una said. Her voice was slightly unsteady. "But I've been looking for you too." Naomi looked at this young woman, at the face she hadn't seen in 4 years, in the dark, in the rain, through a car window. She looked very different in a gown in a lit room than she had on a highway shoulder, and also she looked exactly the same. The fear and the gratitude both present, just rearranged into something that didn't require the dark to be visible. "I remember you," Naomi said. Yuna's careful composure broke, just at the edges. She pressed her lips together and looked at Naomi and said, "Thank you," in a voice that made the two words carry everything they needed to carry, which was considerable. Naomi said, "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Yuna said. "I want to. I've wanted to for 4 years." She paused. "He didn't tell you I was going to be here, did he?" "No. That's so him." She shook her head with the exasperation of someone who has been managing the decisions of a particular person for their entire life and has developed affection and irritation in equal measure. "He plans everything except the part where he tells people what the plan is." Naomi almost smiled. "I've noticed that." They stood together near the edge of the room, and the gala moved around them, and at 8:15 the lights shifted and Kyle walked onto the stage. He was different up there than he was in rooms with her. She noticed this immediately. It wasn't that he performed. He didn't. That was the thing. He simply occupied the stage the way he occupied every space, with a completeness that made the space seem like it had been waiting for him. He thanked the room, briefly. With the efficiency of a man for whom pleasantries are a tax, he pays at the minimum required rate. He talked about the foundation for 3 minutes, its work, its reach, the numbers that mattered. Then he stopped. He looked out at the room, and he said, "I want to tell you a story." The room, which had been doing what rooms do during speeches, half listening, murmuring, conducting its own small transactions, went quiet. He told it the way he had told it to her, in the corridor, in the quiet. Without performance, without score settling, just the facts, which were, she was discovering, the most devastating way to tell any story that is true. The rain, the highway, 40 minutes. Every car passing. One woman stopping, getting soaked in the rain, staying for 2 hours, making a frightened 22-year-old laugh. He said, "She never asked for a name, never asked for anything." He said, "I looked for her for 4 years." He said, "I found her 3 weeks ago." And then he looked out at the room, at the 600 people, and the cameras, and the press, and the politicians, and the journalists, and he said her name. Her name is Naomi Brooks. He said it the way you say something that has been true for a long time, and you are simply now saying it out loud for the room to hear. She is in this room tonight. 600 heads turned. She felt it before she processed it. The wave of attention moving across the room, looking for her, finding her at the left side near the edge where she was standing, very still in a dark green dress with her hands at her sides, and her face doing something she couldn't control, something that was coming up from below the level of management, something that was not going to be filed in the cabinet. The applause started somewhere near the front and moved backward through the crowd the way fire moves through dry grass, fast, total, without gaps. Yuna beside her reached over and took her hand. Naomi did not cry. She had made an arrangement. She held Yuna's hand and looked at the stage where Kyle was looking directly at her, and the cameras found her, and the screens on either side of the stage showed the room responding, and somewhere in the back of her mind the part of her that was always counting things registered. This is being broadcast, which meant Marcus was watching, which meant Celestine was watching, which meant every person who had built their version of her, the folding table, the woman nobody looks at twice, the desperate one who orchestrated and manipulated and used what she had, was watching the room full of 600 influential people rise to their feet for the woman they had spent years dismissing, and there was not a single thing any of them could do to stop it. Her aunt had said, "People believe what makes sense." She had been right. And now the story that made sense had changed. She felt the shift in the room like a physical thing, the way air pressure changes before weather arrives. 600 people on their feet, cameras recording, her name in the air. And somewhere at the back of the ballroom, she became aware of movement near the press section. Not cameras, a figure. Standing very still, the way people stand when they're watching something they didn't anticipate. She couldn't see the face clearly from where she was. The room was full and the light was directional, and her view was partially blocked. But she recognized the jacket. She had seen it at the gala. She had seen it on the man who had stepped into her path beside the hydrangeas, and asked her, with the confidence of someone who has decided where you rank, what exactly she thought she was doing. Marcus Ellison was in the room, and he was looking at her. The applause was still going. Una was still holding her hand. KL was still on stage. And Marcus Ellison was 20 feet away, watching everything he had built against her come apart in real time, in front of the 600 most connected people in New York, on camera, in a way that could not be undone, could not be retracted, could not be... The applause was still going when Naomi moved. Not toward the stage, not toward the cameras. She moved toward Marcus because she had spent 34 years moving away from things, and she had decided, somewhere between the board meeting and the green dress and Una's hand in hers, that the moving away was finished. She crossed the 20 feet between them with a deliberateness that came from somewhere below decision, somewhere closer to bone. Marcus saw her coming. She watched him see her, watched his face go through 3 expressions in rapid succession, the way faces do when the mind hasn't settled on which lie to wear. The first was surprise. The second was something that tried to be contempt and didn't quite make it. The third was the one underneath the other 2, the one he couldn't help. A man watching the architecture of what he'd built coming down, room by room, in real time, understanding that he is standing inside it. She stopped in front of him. The applause was beginning to soften behind her. The room was starting to move again, people leaning to speak to each other, the particular murmur of 600 people processing something together. Marcus said quietly, "This doesn't change anything." She looked at him. She had known this face her whole life, had seen it at Thanksgiving tables and holiday gatherings, and the particular performances of family unity that the Brooks Ellison Extended Network staged at regular intervals. She had grown up beside this face. She had let this face tell her things about herself for longer than she should have. "You're right," she said. "It doesn't change what you did." His jaw tightened. "What I did." He said it like the phrase was an accusation he found absurd. "I asked questions. I reached out to people. That's not, you gave a journalist my employer's name at 9:47 p.m., she said. "I have the timestamps. My lawyer has them. The outlet's legal team has them." She watched his face. "You tried to get me fired, Marcus. Out of a job I've had for 12 years, that I built, that has nothing to do with you or your jealousy or whatever story you've been telling yourself about why I don't deserve good things." The word jealousy landed, and she saw it land, saw him flinch at it, very slightly, with the involuntary honesty of a person who has been named correctly. "I was protecting the family," he said. His voice had dropped further. Around them the room was its own noise, and their conversation existed in a pocket of relative quiet that nobody was attending to yet. "A man like that walks into..." "You were protecting yourself," she said, "from what I was becoming. In the room." She held his gaze. "That's all this was." He looked at her for a moment that stretched out uncomfortably. Then he said something she didn't expect. He said, "Maybe." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't anywhere close to an apology. It was a single word extended like a white flag that wasn't fully raised, tentative, reluctant, the verbal equivalent of a man setting something down without admitting he was carrying it. But it was there. She registered it with the careful, unsentimental part of her that had learned, over years of practice, to distinguish between the gestures that mean something and the ones that are performances of meaning. This one meant something, small, real, insufficient, still there. She said, "I'm not going to tell you what happens to your contracts. You'll find out." She paused. "And I'm not going to tell you what I hope for you, because I haven't decided yet." She took one breath, steady. "But I'm done explaining myself to you. We're done with that part." She turned and walked back toward Una before he could answer. It was the right exit. She knew it was the right exit because she felt, for the first time since the morning she had read the article in her wrinkled dress, something that wasn't quite lightness. She wasn't sure she had lightness in her right now, but was close to it. The sensation of having put something down that she had been carrying in her hands for so long she'd forgotten she was carrying it. Una was where she'd left her, and she looked at Naomi with the particular expression of someone who understands what they just watched without having heard it. "Okay," Una said. "Working on it," Naomi said. Una handed her a glass of water. Of course she did. Naomi drank it. The gala continued around them. Kyle came off stage 20 minutes later, navigating the room with the patience of a man who has learned to accept that events like this require a certain tax of handshakes and brief conversations. And when he finally reached her, it was with the unhurried movement of someone who had known where she was the entire time and was arriving now because now was the right moment and not before. He stood beside her, not in front of her, beside. "You came," he said. "You asked." A brief pause. "Marcus was here." "I know. I talked to him." He looked at her. "Are you all right?" It was a simple question. It was the same simple question her mother asked, that her therapist asked, that people who cared for her asked, and she had spent years giving it the careful, truncated answer. "I'm fine. I'm managing. I'm okay." Because the full answer was longer than the question seemed to invite. She stood in the Mandarin Oriental with 600 people around her and the cameras still running at the perimeter, and Kyle beside her, and she gave herself 3 seconds to locate the honest answer. "Not entirely," she said, "but more than I was." He nodded. That was the thing about him, she had learned. He did not rush the moment past itself. He let answers land where they landed. "The contracts," she said, "already in motion. By Monday, his 2 private sector contracts will be under review for the circumstances of their award. The city agency matter is more procedural, but it will move." "He said maybe," she said, "when I told him he was protecting himself, not the family. Himself." Cale was quiet for a moment. "That surprises you." "A little." "People sometimes surprise you at the moment of losing," he said. "When there's nothing left to protect, some of them get honest. Not all of them, but some." She thought about that. "Does it change anything? What he loses?" "No," Kyle said. He said it without satisfaction, which was the part that made her believe it. "It doesn't change what he did. The consequences aren't punishment, they're just what's true, becoming visible. He built something on a false foundation. The foundation is being removed." He paused. "The structure falls on its own." She looked out at the room, at the 600 people who had been on their feet for her name 20 minutes ago and were now doing what people do after a moment, returning to their ordinary transactions, their glasses and their conversations, carrying what they'd witnessed in some form that would integrate into their understanding of the evening, which would integrate into the story of tonight, which would become part of the public record in some form she couldn't fully predict. "My aunt is going to call me tomorrow," she said. "Probably." "My mother already texted." She glanced at her phone. Gloria had sent 3 messages in the last 40 minutes. The first was a string of characters that suggested she had been texting with significant emotion and limited fine motor control. The second was, "I'm watching this on my phone, I'm crying." The third was simply, "Naomi." She showed it to Kyle. He looked at the 3 messages in sequence and something moved across his face. Not a full smile, but the thing that lived beside one. "Your mother loves you," he said. "She does," Naomi said. "She also asked me last Thursday if I was eating enough, so she contains multitudes." This time he did smile. Brief, genuine, the same one she'd heard on the phone 3 weeks ago. It looked the same in person as it sounded over a line, which was, she thought, a good sign about a person. They left the gala at 10:15. Not together. Not exactly. They left at the same time with the understanding that the city outside the building was not yet a place where the 2 of them moving through it together wouldn't generate the kind of attention that neither of them had the energy for on a Thursday night after a month like this one. His car was at the front. She was taking a cab. This was practical and fine, and also, standing on the sidewalk in the cold in the dark green dress, she was aware of the specific texture of the moment. The 2 of them on either side of a curb in February, the city doing its thing, the gala still lit behind the hotel's glass. 18 days ago, she said, "I told you I needed a few days." "You did." "I took 18. "You took what you needed." She looked at him on the other side of the curb. The cold had put color into the air between them, visible breath in the light from the hotel entrance. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if the truth is complicated." It usually is," he said. "What happens now?" She said it plainly. "The story is corrected. The record is set. My job is safe. Marcus loses his contracts." She paused. "What happens to this, whatever this is?" He looked at her. That direct, unhurried look that she had stopped finding unsettling around day 4 and had started finding something else, which she had not yet named but which she was aware of. "That depends on what you want," he said. "I'm asking what you want." "I want," he said, and he said it slowly, not because he was uncertain, but because he was selecting the words the way you select something you want to hold up to the light, to have dinner with you, not at an event, not with 600 people. He paused. "And then I want to find out what comes after that." She stood on the curb in the cold. "Dinner is manageable," she said. "Saturday?" "Saturday works." His car pulled up. He opened the door, and before he got in, he looked back at her. One of those direct looks, the kind that said what it said without requiring anything additional. "Dark green," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" "You should wear it again sometime." He got in the car. It pulled away. She stood on the sidewalk for another 30 seconds, in the cold, with the city going past her in every direction, and then she raised her hand for a cab, and when it stopped, she got in and gave her address, and sat back and looked out the window at New York moving past her, and felt, quietly, carefully, without wanting to press on it too hard, the particular sensation of a life that has survived the thing that was supposed to collapse it, and found, on the other side of the collapsing, that it is still standing. She got home at 11. She called her mother. Gloria picked up before the first ring had finished, which meant she had been holding the phone, for approximately 45 minutes, which was deeply on brand and also, in the way of all the things that were deeply on brand about Gloria Brooks, somehow comforting. "You were on TV?" her mother said. "I know." 600 people stood up. "I know, Mom." "Naomi." Her mother's voice broke, just slightly, at the seam. Not collapse. Gloria was not a collapsing kind of woman, but the seam showed. "Baby, 600 people." Naomi sat down on her couch in the dark green dress. She had not turned the lights on. The apartment was lit only by the ambient glow of the city through the windows, which was enough. It was always enough in New York. The city contributed its own light, whether you wanted it to or not. "I know," she said softly. "I watched it on Sheila's phone because my data ran out," her mother said. She was crying too. Sheila doesn't cry. I've known Sheila for 22 years. "Tell Sheila thank you." "I will tell her no such thing. She'll never let me live it down." A pause. Then, "Celestine called me. I figured she would. She said," her mother stopped, reorganized. "She asked if you were all right. She said it in the way she says things, which is not, it wasn't what most people would call an apology, but..." Another pause. "I've known my sister for 61 years. That was as close as she gets." Naomi looked at the ceiling, the smooth white ceiling of her apartment that she had stared at on many mornings and many nights over many years. "What did you tell her?" "I told her Naomi is doing just fine. Better than fine." Gloria's voice had steadied. "Because you are." "I'm getting there." "Same thing." A brief silence, comfortable now. "This man, Kyle." "Mom, I'm just asking." "You're not asking, you're stating and then waiting for me to volunteer. Is that not asking?" A pause that contained the particular energy of a woman who has been deploying this technique for decades and finds it very effective. Sheila says he seems like someone who knows what he wants." "He does," Naomi said. "And he wants..." "Saturday," Naomi said. "He wants dinner Saturday." A long pause. Then her mother said, very quietly, "Good." Just that. Good. One word that carried everything Gloria Brooks had ever wanted for her daughter and had not always known how to say. All the mornings she had watched Naomi leave for events and gatherings where she would not be seen. All the years of watching a woman she had raised to be extraordinary be treated as ordinary by people who should have known better. All of it compressed into that one syllable. "Good," Naomi agreed. They talked for another 20 minutes. About nothing significant. About Sheila, about the bookkeeper's office, and a dentist named Dr. Perkins who Gloria had complicated feelings about what Naomi should eat because apparently the question of whether she was eating enough was not retiring from the conversation anytime soon. When they hung up, Naomi sat in the dark and quiet of her apartment and let the silence be what it was, which was just silence. Not the silence of being invisible, Not the silence of a room where nobody has thought to say your name. Just quiet. Her quiet. The kind a person owns. She took the dress off carefully and hung it up. She thought about the 11 dresses and the one dressing room and the decision, finally, to try only one. She thought about what it meant to stop auditioning and just arrive. She went to bed at midnight and slept for 8 hours straight, which was the first time she had done that in a month. And when she woke up, the city was gray-white with morning light. And she lay still for a moment and did the inventory she always did. Not of threats, not of problems, but of what was real and present and hers. The job was hers. The apartment was hers. Saturday was coming. Her mother had said good. Marcus's contracts were under review. She thought about him standing in the ballroom, watching the room respond to her name. She thought about that single word, maybe, and what it had cost him to say it, and whether it meant anything, and decided, not yet. Maybe someday. Not yet. She did not wish him harm, and she did not wish him well, and she did not owe him a timeline for that ambivalence. And holding both without resolving them felt, for the first time, like a choice rather than a failure. Celestine she thought about differently. Celestine was her aunt. Celestine was 61 years old and had spent those years inside a system of values that had never been challenged from inside, and the challenge, when it came, had come from the direction she least expected, from the niche she had spent decades treating as a fixed quantity, a known and limited thing, a woman whose ceiling was already decided. The phone call to Gloria was not an apology. She knew that. Celestine was not built for apology. But the phone call had happened, and things that happen are real, and Naomi was old enough to understand the difference between a person's best and the best possible person, and to hold the first without requiring it to be the second. She would see her aunt again. Family had a way of reassembling. When it did, she would be different. Not softer. She had been soft enough for long enough. But settled. In herself. In the knowledge that she did not need the room's permission to be who she was, and that the room, any room, had a way of adjusting to the person who stopped asking for it. She got up, made coffee, drank it properly this time, sitting down. At 9:15, her phone showed a text from Kael. It said, "Yuna wants to know if she can come to dinner Saturday. I told her no. She said to tell you she disagrees with me. I'm telling you so you understand what my family is like." Naomi read it twice. She set the phone down. She picked it up. She typed, "Tell her she can come to the next one." She sent it and put the phone face down and drank her coffee. The next one. She had written it without thinking and then thought about it after, which was perhaps the correct order. Act first, understand it later, let the meaning catch up to the decision. There would be a next one. She had said so. That was real now. The week that followed was ordinary in the way that weeks are ordinary when you've survived something large and returned to the regular scale of your life, which somehow feels both smaller and more valuable than it did before. She went to work. She ran her meetings. She called Patricia to confirm what Patricia already knew, that the situation had resolved, that the board needed no further discussion, that the organization's communications office could quietly consider the matter closed. Patricia said, "You're a remarkably intact person for someone who just had their life turned inside out in 3 weeks." Naomi thought about it. "I had help," she said. "From him?" "From myself," she said. "Mostly." A pause. "And from him." Patricia made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite agreement, and was somehow both. "Dinner Saturday?" "How do you know about Saturday?" "Naomi, I know everything that happens in this organization, and most things that happen adjacent to it." A beat. "Wear the green dress again." Naomi stared at her phone after they hung up. Everyone had an opinion about the green dress. Saturday came. The restaurant was small, downtown, the kind of place that didn't need to announce itself because the people who needed to know already knew. She arrived 7 minutes late, which was not intentional and was also not entirely unintentional, and Kael was at the table with water already poured and the particular patience of a man who had looked for one person for 4 years and could therefore manage 7 minutes without incident. Yuna was not there. Naomi had known she wouldn't be. She sat down across from him, and they looked at each other across a small table in a restaurant that smelled like good food and careful cooking, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said back. It was, she thought, the most normal exchange they'd had. No ballroom, no corridor, No lawyers, no cameras. Just two people at a table with the work of getting here behind them and no narrative in the room except the one they were making. They ate. They talked. Not about the events of the last month, though those would come up over time, in the gradual way things surface between people who are deciding whether they trust each other. They talked about other things, about her work, the case for housing advocacy that she could articulate with the precision of 12 years of genuine commitment, about his foundation and what he had built and what he thought it was for, about Una, who texted him 4 times during dinner, which he showed her because he apparently found it funny and also because he was the kind of person who did not pretend to be different from what he was. About the wrong restaurant Marcus, who she told him had actually recently opened a restaurant, which was something she found either poetic or deeply ironic and couldn't decide which. Cale said, "Maybe both." She said, "Maybe both is the honest answer for most things." He looked at her across the table with that look, the one she had stopped finding unsettling and had started finding something she was ready now, sitting in a small restaurant on a Saturday in February, to name. She did not say it yet. That was for later. There would be a later. She had said so herself, the next one, and things you say become real, which was a fact she had spent enough of her life learning that she intended to apply it going forward. She had come to the dinner in the dark green dress, not for anyone else, for herself, because it was a good dress, and because she had bought it with intention, and because the woman who had spent 3 weeks surviving something that was designed to diminish her and had arrived on the other side of it taller than before deserved to wear what she wanted and sit where she chose and be seen by the people who had chosen to look, really look, without the filter of diminishment and assumption and all the quiet cruelties that families and strangers and the long ordinary machinery of the world can direct at a woman simply for taking up space. She was done apologizing for the space. The dinner ended at 10. They walked out together into the cold, which had not reconsidered itself since Thursday and was still the specific February cold of New York that gets into the collar and the wrists and makes people move faster than they normally would. She did not move faster. She walked at her own pace, which had always been deliberate, and he matched it. At the corner before her cab came, he said, "Next Saturday." "Next Saturday," she said. Not a question from either of them. A fact confirmed between two people who had arrived at it honestly, through a month of fire and disclosure and small moments of water in corridors, through 4 years of distance that had collapsed into a single crossed room, through the long, slow work of two people finding out who the other one was and deciding that the finding out was worth continuing. The cab came. She got in. She did not look back through the window because she did not need to. Some things you know without checking. Some things have settled into the body below the level of doubt. She looked forward, at the city moving past the glass, at the lights and the speed and the magnificent, indifferent, beautiful, relentless, ordinary, extraordinary life of it, and she felt, finally, cleanly, without qualification, like a woman who had come through. Not unchanged. Changed, that was the honest word. Changed by what had been done to her and changed by what she had done in response. By the board meeting and the corridor and the green dress and the dinner and all the ordinary Tuesday nights of the last 34 years that had added up, accumulation by accumulation, to a person who knew how to stand in the rain for 2 hours with a frightened stranger and not ask for anything in return except that the stranger be okay. That was who she was. That was who she had always been. The city had just finally caught up. The cab turned north on Fifth Avenue and the park was on her left. Dark and large and still. And somewhere beyond the park, her mother was probably still awake, which was a constant of the universe. And somewhere across the city, her cousin was sitting with the knowledge of what Monday would bring, and somewhere downtown, Kael was being driven somewhere, and Una had probably already texted him twice more. And the story that had been told about Naomi Brooks 3 weeks ago was a thing that existed and had done its damage, and had been answered, not undone. Nothing is undone. But answered clearly, publicly, in front of 600 people, and whatever cameras had picked it up, and however far it would travel. She thought about what Kael had said at the beginning, how far this story travels. She had asked people in another life that was also this life to leave a comment about where they were watching from. She was watching from here, from the back of a cab on Fifth Avenue on a Saturday in February, in a dark green dress, on the way home to an apartment that was hers, heading toward a Monday that was no longer frightening, and a Saturday that was already decided, and a future that had been, until recently, a thing she'd stopped letting herself look at directly. She looked at it now. It was still there. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.